My name is Paula Long. I'm about to interview Lawrence Wally Brown. It is November 1, 2011. We're at the Westfield Community Center on West Broad Street in Westfield, New Jersey. Now, Wally has had, his family has had a huge impact on the community. Wally actually was president of the community center where we are right now. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to interview him and share his stories with all of the community that will be listening to this in the future. So, of course, I'm going to start and ask Wally, where are you and your family from, and when were you born, and where were you born?
Well, I was born in Westfield on December 19th, 1931. I was one of 9 boys and 1 girl in the family, the Brown family, and all of us, except for my sister, were born on West Broad Street, Westfield, New Jersey.
In a home, of course, at that time.
At home. Dr. Brock was the family physician. Prior to my being born in Westfield, my family history, my grandfather, James R. Derry, was a business person. He had a livery stable on Downer Street at 511. We also had members of our family that were directly related to the St. Luke's AME Zion Church, going back to the 1800s. I did some research on my family for the Westfield Negro History Club and Ernie Powell, historian, and I transcribed notes given to me by Miss Hattie Harris, and those notes had some impact on me because I discovered my own heritage. Mm-hmm. I found out that John C. Williams was a well-known colored person in the town of Westfield. I don't know other than the fact that I believe he was born in Westfield in 1791. I have a Bible that was printed in 1823, which belonged to my great uncle family, Charles Wallace Mulford. And the Bible says Mulford on it, and they were members of the Presbyterian Church. We used to call it the Revolutionary War Church.
Yeah, that's
on Mountain Avenue.
Right, very famous church. Now, excuse me, 1 minute. That Bible, Wally, do you have that Bible, or did you give that to? Okay, I thought Stan.
I have the Bible. It was printed in 1823. Mm-hmm. I also have another Bible that was printed in 1866. Mm-hmm. The family of John C. Williams, from whom I'm a direct descendant thereof. It went from Williams to Mulford, Mulford to Derry, Derry to Brown. I can trace my mother's history, as I said, back to the 1791, the birth of John C. Williams. My mother's maiden name was Williams, Sidonia Williams, a daughter of the John C. Williams referred to in all of the historical books in the town of Westfield. And my mother was born in 1891 in Westfield, and my grandfather, her father, as I said earlier, had a livery stable at 511 Downer Street. He sold kerosene, ice, he had horses and everything, and he had one of the first horseless carriages, automobiles, for livery and taxi services in the town of Westfield.
So they had their own business.
Yes.
Very successful at this time.
Yes.
Interesting to know that at this time, there was, as you called them, at this time they were referred to as colored people.
Exactly.
Right?
Some of the books that I read had some reference to that this was somewhat of a well-to-do congregation, as they call it, when they were getting ready to form the St. Luke's AME Zion Church, that the population at that time was deemed well off or something of that nature. I believe that's what they intended to say, that they were very progressive or whatever. And as I said earlier, my grandfather was a businessman. My great-grandfather, grandfather's father, Charles Derry, was a lamplighter in the town of Westfield when they had gas lamps. My father family was in Painted Post, New York. And my father met my mother. He was an insurance salesman. And he attempted to get a job as a draftsman at some company, but was turned down because of his race.
But I'd like to say, we can conclude your family has been always successful and been able to be, quote, business people, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Not all of them maybe, but
Some
many
of them,
at this
right.
time, and perhaps being in a community which at that time wasn't totally affluent, but certainly must have been a successful community, giving them opportunities, but they certainly took advantage of the opportunities.
Absolutely. I can't state that any of my family members on my mother's side were in fact in slavery at all. Mm-hmm. But I know that my mother told me that my grandfather escaped on the Underground Railroad from Baltimore, Maryland to New Bedford, Massachusetts. And then,
About what time
and
would
as a
that have
small
been?
child, my grandfather was brought to Westfield. That's James R. Derry. Mm-hmm. But his father, Charles Derry, was the one that brought him to Westfield as a small child, and he was the lamplighter in the town of Westfield. And that was in the 1800s, I believe. Since that time, my grandfather died at at the beginning of World War II. He died in 1940 or 1941, and of diabetes. And I remember all of my uncles. They were all taxi drivers and or laborers in the town of Westfield. Since my father's family, since my father migrated from New York State down to New Jersey, he was an insurance man, as I said, and he was in East Rutherford, I believe it was, as an insurance man, and he wound up in Westfield, and I guess he met my mother somehow or another as her insurance man or whatever, I don't know. But he became the town custodian.
Mm-hmm. This is
My father.
your father. Mm-hmm.
And I was a child in Westfield, and of course I remember my early days in Westfield. It was being very nice. I went to McKinley School, and I remember the teachers there. They were all very good, and I remember they used to have a special class. I guess that special class was for kids that either didn't learn or had behavioral problems.
Oh, even at that time they had.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in the sixth grade, that special class. And those kids were either held back or they didn't go to Roosevelt Junior High School. I went to Roosevelt Junior High School, and then for a short period of time there, I wanted to go to a military school, and so I decided I wanted to go to Bordentown. And when I discovered that my father had told me that this was not what I thought it was, I came back to Roosevelt Junior High School, and of course I lost out on a semester of school, and of course I had to then lose 1 year of graduating from Roosevelt.
So this Bordentown school would have been a private school?
Right.
Or a military school?
I thought it was a military school, but actually it was an industrial training institute, and it was basically to reform kids or something of that nature. It was a state-run school, and I thought it was a military school. They had uniforms and everything, and my father said, "No, it's not what you think it is." But I wanted to go.
Oh, so he let you, and the school let you go?
Right,
And
so
then you
I
came back. Oh, good, thank
and
God.
restarted my school because it wasn't what I wanted. I went primarily because printing trade was what I wanted to be, like a printer, and I took that in junior high school, and I wanted to be a printer. So that was the other thing that caused me to want to go to that school. Anyhow, I got back into school, and then I started playing football at Roosevelt, and that was the beginning of my football career. My older brother was an influence on me to play ball, and quite naturally I went on and I got to high school. I played ball, and of course I was delivering newspapers because my father couldn't afford to buy us, gym sneakers and this, that, and the other thing. We had to either work on a garbage truck or do something to get a bicycle, to do this, to do that. So we were very well able to go around the corner to get to where we wanted to go and to get the things that we needed. So we had to find ways to make our own wagons and so forth out of stuff that we picked up from the garbage truck. And but we did it.
A lot different than today, but certainly at that time, young people would have really had to work hard and
Right.
and
And
provide
then,
for themselves.
And at the same time, I learned a lot of things being in the Boy Scouts of America.
Oh, you were part of Boy
I was a Boy
Scouts?
Scout in Troop 79. I got up to first class Scout, and that was also out of McKinley School. We used to meet there. And of course, at that time, there was a troop leader. His name was Kermit Plinton. He was a member of the Plinton family, which were very, very well known in the town of Westfield.
The Plinton family,
The
you're
Plinton
saying,
family,
the
yeah,
funeral
yeah.
parlor?
No, not the funeral parlor, but his brother.
Oh, okay,
There was a James Plinton,
okay.
Jimmy Plinton. He was the aviator. He took me for my first airplane ride ever in a Piper Cub
Oh, my.
in the 40s. And as a kid, it was my first airplane ride ever. And I always wanted to be a pilot, and I wanted to always go in the Air Force. But when I went to join the Air Force and when the Korean War broke out in 50 and 51, they had a waiting period. And I was in a hurry to get into the service, to get into the war. I had 3 brothers, all served in World War II in Europe and D-Day invasion. And I was always prone to military and things like that. So I wanted to get out and go in the service. So when they said that they had a week, I was disappointed. So a Marine guy went by at the recruiting office and said, "We don't have any waiting." And I said, "Okay." And I went down there and I left Westfield in January of 1951 and joined the United States Marine Corps.
Well, you've certainly had a lot of aspirations along the way. You never really were hesitant at what you wanted to do. But let's go back for a moment to when you were in school. What was it like in terms of being black at that time? Did you feel prejudice, or what was things?
No, there was no real prejudice because all of my friends, I had very good friends, and really we didn't know specifically how subtle separation of the races were at that time, but in the town of Westfield, we didn't really know that there was that so-called discrimination that we had heard of in other places. And of course, my father always used to tell us, because he worked down at the headquarters of the municipal building, that, we didn't get into trouble, and the things that we did do were not bad, and to stay out of trouble, to go to school. And my class advisors, Howard Tomlinson, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have gotten my diploma, because he told me to stay and take my exams and don't leave before, I take my exams. And so I was thankful to him for that good advice.
But would other children not have done that? Was he guiding all the children that were black? And you say you heard in other communities maybe they didn't.
No, I don't think that I think at that time, in my own judgment, and be very honest, I thought that the Westfield schools and the kids and so forth did not treat me any different than other. There was one time that after a football game that we wanted to have ice cream sodas and ice cream, treats, and there was one place on Broad Street. I remember the place is right next to the Westfield Trust Company called
Shades.
Hoyerman's.
Oh, there
or
was
Shades,
also
yeah.
Shades.
Yeah, and of course, they didn't want to serve me. And I remember the whole team said, "Well, if you don't want to serve us," then they all wanted to walk out and didn't want to buy anything. I remember that.
Oh, wow. And so did they serve you?
No, we just left.
I thought because the whole team left, they might have let you stay. They did not.
No, I don't remember exactly whether I got served or not, but I know the question was raised. So that was personal at that time. And then of course there was the Woolworths and the Murphys, where
5 and 10.
5 and 10. We had to take orders out. We couldn't sit at the counter, so to eat. And they would always, say, "You wanted to take out?" And we said, "No, we want to eat here."
Now this would be when you were in high school.
No, this was in
middle
maybe
school?
prior to high school.
Middle school?
Well, we didn't call it middle school. I was probably between junior high school and elementary school.
And that would have been then
In the late 40s and...
early 50s?
Yeah, not in the 50s, but the late 40s, I would say. During the war, World War II. And, but in general, at the movies, for example, as little black kids, we were asked to either sit in the balcony or in the rear of the theater. Well, at that time, we didn't know anything about this. And the only real innocence that I would know about prejudice and so forth was I had a good little white friend, and he always asked me, he said, "Why is your face always dirty?" And I was I couldn't understand why he would say that. But yet still, we were friends.
Good.
And
that's
we didn't
good.
have a problem, but it was his concern. But how his parents did that, the faces were, I don't know. But at least that's the only time I had any problem with prejudice and so forth. And then, of course, as I got older and I got in a job and I worked with the government and so forth, the only other time that I faced any of that stuff was when people would say to me, "Oh, you think differently, or you talk differently." And I'm saying to myself, "Well, what are they talking about?" "Oh, I don't talk black or African American, or I couldn't understand that." So, well, I knew that if you graduate from Westfield High School, you could go to about any college in the country.
Even at that time. See,
Yes, I knew that.
That's quite something. Cause
And I said, well, my great uncle, Charles Wallace Mulford, always used to tell me, he says, knowledge is power. Stay in school, seek a skill. And that's what I tried to do. And Mr. Tomlinson was the one that gave me that skill. He told me to take the stenography, and I didn't want to take it because there was a bunch of girls in there, but I took it anyhow. It kept me off the front lines in Korea. And I thought I was going to the Pentagon, but I didn't go to the Pentagon. They sent me back to Korea. But when I got to Korea, I only had 1 year left to do, but I could only be assigned to a bird colonel or a general above, that rank, as a court reporter or stenographer. And so I was assigned to the G2 section, which is intelligence, at the command post with the general. So I thank Mr. Tomlinson for that good advice of taking that stenography as a skill.
which kept you off the front lines.
Cut me off the front lines, right. And of course, I was awarded the Medal of Commendation from the United States Marine Corps.
Excellent. Wow.
And for my service in Korea and intelligence. And then I decided that my enlistment period was up 51, 54, and I was being returned to the States. I was undecided about re-enlistment in the Marines. And so I got back to the United States in December of 63. I mean 63. No, wait a minute, no, 53.
Yeah, 63 would have been
Right,
later.
in December of
Right.
53. And at the time I had previously gotten married out in Indianapolis, Indiana. And
Is your wife from Indianapolis?
yes, my wife was from Indianapolis.
Okay.
And I got married, and of course, that marriage didn't last long, and then I remarried again in 1964. And at that time, I had previously been a postal worker in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I went to Indiana University for spring football at the Big Ten College because of my friend from Plainfield, Tom Campbell, had stated to me that the Indiana University was looking for single-wing fullbacks. So Tom Campbell sort of influenced me to go out for spring football at Indiana University.
Yeah, I just want to go back. I think we kind of got through it too quickly. Your athletic role in Westfield High School. You did play football.
Right.
And were quite an athlete. You're in the booster, produced
Yeah, I
a
received-
booklet.
Yes.
And you have a trophy that we're looking at right now.
Yeah. I was the Westfield High School Boosters Award for 1950, Wallace Brown. And I was also a recipient of the Heisman Trophy award at Westfield High School, along with Buddy Red and myself, and we attended the Eisman Trophy ceremony in New York, Downtown Athletic Club, for Vic Janowitz when he won the Heisman Trophy.
Now, would there have been any other black athletes at that time? Were you one of the prominent ones?
At that time. I was one from Westfield.
Only one? Were you the only?
No.
Okay.
Buddy Red and myself.
Okay.
We were selected by I forget his name now, but anyhow.
But today you could be recruited. This would have been your entree to college or something, right?
Well, yeah, I was a fullback. Well, the Elizabeth Journal said I was one of the most underrated fullbacks in the county. Mm-hmm. But I just said, I did what I could do for the team. And for 1949, we were state champions and co-champions. And in 1949 and 1950, those were my years. And I just remember being, that type of football player. I think one of my classmates says, I shined on the dance floor as well as in sports.
Oh, correct. Well, there's a big correlation between dance and football.
Right. And so that was a part of my career. And to this day, we just celebrated our 60th class reunion.
Oh, wow.
At the Echo Lake Country Club last October 7th.
Excellent.
And a lot of the guys that there we play football with, some of them are gone, but my teammates in the class of 51 was very significant. And like I said, I didn't experience any real discrimination, racism until I went into the Marine Corps. And I went to Parris Island, South Carolina.
So, Wally, right after high school then, I know your family certainly valued education, it sounded like. They always encouraged you to do well and pay attention and do work. So after high school, though, now what is it that you did?
I joined the Marines.
You joined the Marines.
I joined the Marines before graduation, before June. In fact,
and would that have been because you couldn't afford college, or you just weren't sure now?
No, I wasn't sure
what you wanted at that point.
I wanted to do, but I was just war-minded. I just wanted to go to war. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to be in the military. Mm-hmm. And having marched to the Boy Scouts and all the parades and all that stuff, I liked that discipline or something. And I always wanted to be a pilot, but I knew I couldn't fly, and so I had a waiting period. My first choice was the Air Force. But they had that waiting period.
Yeah, you said that, yeah.
And so the Marines said, so they said, we'll give you travel, adventure, everything. And I got it.
Oh, sure.
So that my career in the Marine Corps, was 3 years. And then when I got discharged, I had a choice of 2 jobs. One was being an air controller at Indianapolis Weir Cook Airport, or a clerk with the Internal Revenue Service in Indianapolis, Indiana. Mm-hmm. Well, I chose the clerk position in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I was kind of glad I did that because that's where my career took off. So I started as a grade 1 clerk with the Internal Revenue Service in the Indianapolis District Office. And I worked in as a file clerk, and then I advanced through in-service training and college courses. And I became a claims certifier. And I was promoted then to a grade 5. And then, of course, my mother passed away in 1959. And at that time, I had decided that Big Ten football was not for me because of my age and physical condition. And that one semester at Indiana University for spring football was enough. And so I took a part-time job at the post office. And then I tried to transfer my post office to the town of Westfield after my mother passed away in 59. I was not successful at that. I had to quit the post office there, come here and take the exam, get on the register in Westfield to be a mail carrier.
So you did come back, and then when this would have been in what year?
59.
59. You came back to Westfield. You weren't married.
Right.
Okay.
And at that time I was separated from my first spouse.
Okay.
And I came back to Westfield to help my father out, But he says I was 1 month too late because he then remarried. But anyhow, I got a job with the post office in Westfield in 59. And then I got sick. I had a penicillin reaction in late '59, and I was in VA hospital for a while. And then when I came out, I said, I'm going to try to go back to the Internal Revenue Service. And I did, re-establish my status with the Department of Treasury.
But where were you working there? You're living in Westfield?
I was living in Westfield,
And working.
I stayed with my father for a while, and then with a friend for a while, and then I moved to Newark, and I stayed at the Y for a while, and while I was being employed by the Internal Revenue Service as a clerk, grade 1 messenger, and I said, well, I've got to do something about this. So anyhow, what I did, I applied for what they call the Blue Ribbon Training Program under President Kennedy for upward mobility of employees, minorities in employment. And so I took advantage of that program.
And went back to school?
And went back to school, taking courses at Rutgers at night and so forth, pursuing a degree in accounting and or taxation, one of the two. So my career with the Internal Revenue Service, I started with the collection division. I was assigned positions as clerk. I've done everything to a tax return: open it, stamp it, audit it, investigate it. So my career with the Internal Revenue Service lasted for 30 years.
Wow. In Newark?
I had part-time in Indianapolis, Indiana from 54 to 58, and then 2 years in the post office, 58 to 60. Then 1960, I returned to the Internal Revenue Service from 1960 till 1986 when I retired. As I said, started as a grade 1, and I retired as a grade 13 special agent.
Wow, that's...
Treasury law enforcement agent.
I think you did pretty well.
And during that career with the Internal Revenue Service, campaign 68, after Martin Luther King was shot in Tennessee, I believe in April, Robert Kennedy was shot in California in June or July.
Correct.
President Johnson ordered all Treasury law enforcement agents to assist the Secret Service in protecting candidates for president and vice president.
Really?
So I was selected.
Oh.
I was one of 14 members of a combat dignitary protection team from the Newark district. And I teamed up with other Treasury law enforcement agents, and we were assigned to protect Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey in campaign 68.
Oh, I wouldn't think this is what they
And that's, as you see here on my lapel, you see the 3 H's. You won't find anybody else with that.
Hubert
H. Horatio Humphrey.
So that's interesting that they would take the IRS.
Well, we're all Treasury law enforcement agents.
Law enforcement agency, yeah.
Which we included customs, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and we.
Now, you weren't living in Westfield at this time. You were in Newark.
I was in East Orange.
Okay, so what? Now, are you never to be back to Westfield at this point?
I never lived back in Westfield.
Okay, but your family, did your family remain here?
My mother passed away in 1959. My father passed away in 1971. That was the last. My father was the last one to live in Westfield.
Because you said you had quite a few siblings.
Yes, and all my family was raised outside of Westfield. They were raised in East Orange. But every month, since 1960, I've come to Westfield and been associated with the Westfield Community Center.
Right, I want to lead up to that and ask you that, because you mentioned in your notes that you were president. So I would like, when you're ready, to explain how you would have gotten involved and what it was prior. You talk about this toy
lending library.
Toy lending library, if you'll explain what that is a little bit. And, and your role, whatever your family, any particular role they did, you explain some of them. Anything that's of significance that your family would have contributed and yourself now.
Right. Well, I can say that my great uncle, Charles Wallace Mulford, was a member of the Avalante Club, which was one of the two clubs, along with the Avalante Club of ladies, of Dr. Brock's wife and Ruth Young and some other lady. they were primary movers in the development of the Westfield Community Center after it had been a toy lending library.
When we say Avalante Club, what was that?
That was ladies of the town, doctors' wives.
Black ladies, black
Yes,
women.
Yes, Blanche Ross, Margaret Lynch, and Evelyn Brock.
Okay, so these were all pretty
Right.
successful business
Ladies, yeah.
people, and
Well, Evelyn Brock was the wife of Dr. Howard Brock. Margaret Lynch, I remember her, and Blanche Ross.
and was there Mrs. Thompson? It was Dr. Thompson.
Dr. Robert H. Thompson, and Danny Wright, and Charles Mulford. They were the members of the Minnewaskin Club, the men.
So Westfield had quite a bit of successful. At this time, they would be
Professionals,
referred to
right.
as black, not
Right.
not African Americans. We went to
No.
the colored time.
Right.
Now they would be referred to as the black citizens, or not?
No, I think at that time they were still referred to as probably probably in books and in writing and in papers would have been Negro.
Negro. Okay.
But the term blacks doesn't come about until late after that.
Okay.
But they were prominent African American citizens,
Professionals.
professionals, dentists, medical doctors, and so forth. And that's when I think that back in the early times, they referred to as the population of coloreds in the early 1900s were of a sort of well-to-do or progressive class of people.
Very professional. Yes.
Okay? I think that's what they meant when they were stating it in certain books that they were written. But I remember, as I said, my great uncle was one of the members of this club called the Minnewaskin Club, and he told me to go to the community center. And I went as a kid to the toy lending library, which was in the 400 block of West Broad Street, 462.
And that's what it was called, the Toy Lending Library.
Right.
And what actually took place there?
Well, the rich people would drop off toys, books, everything, donated for the so-called underprivileged or the underserved members of our community, kids. And I was there at that time. I was one of the younger kids.
Oh, so it was mostly for the children, because we
Yes.
have now Center for Hope Hospice, we have similar things, I guess they've always existed, but this one specifically, would it be clothing as well, and
Everything.
everything for children?
Children, right. And so the toy lending library, in other words, if I was a kid and I wanted a wagon or something like that, I could go down there, I could borrow a wagon.
Now, who would have started or run that, do you know?
That was
Just
the
people in this.
Minnewaskin Club, Dr. Brock, and all of those people, the professional people in the town of Westfield, dentists.
The black professionals?
Right.
Okay.
That's
Started
what they
this
did.
Minnewaskin Club,
Right.
and part of it was the Toy Lending Library.
toy lending
Oh,
library.
I see. Now,
So
it's
they got
interesting they
together.
called it Minnewaskin Club, after the park.
The park, yeah. And the church right there, too.
Oh, because of the Presbyterian?
Presbyterian
I
Church, and that's
see.
where my...
So all these individuals would have been going to the Presbyterian?
No, all I know is that my great uncle, Charles Wallace Mulford, he went to the Presbyterian Church. As far as Dr. Thompson and Danny Wright, I didn't know. They could have, but I don't know that they did.
Because was the Downer Street Church there at that time?
Yes.
That goes back quite a bit.
Yes.
The
Down
Zion
Street-
Church that would have...
Right. Well, that was formed along with John C. Williams back in those days, and Henry Nelson, because that's what's in my family Bible, that name. And in the books relating to the history of St. Luke's AME Zion, certainly the church record will reflect my family's names in there, the Williams, the Darys, the Beans, and the Browns.
And not your family, but I want to recognize Paul Robeson, I believe.
Yes, my great-uncle.
Was someone who attended that
Right,
church.
well, Paul Robeson's father was the minister in those times when my family was associated with the church. Paul Robeson was also a classmate of my uncle Charles Wallace Mulford. And I remember in 1948 when Paul Robeson was playing on I think it was Broadway, Othello. He drove up, and I remember him sitting in this big Cadillac sedan, you know what I mean, limousine, and he gave us tickets to go see Othello. He came to visit my Uncle Charlie on West Broad Street. and he gave us tickets for the play Othello. And I remember going to see that in New York.
Well, did he go to Westville High, Paul Robeson,
Yes,
for a
Paul
while?
Robeson went to Westville
High
High School.
School.
And he was a classmate. My uncle, great uncle, was a classmate of his. And that was in 1948. That's when he was called a communist. He was called everything, you know what I mean? A sympathizer and all this stuff. So it was rather difficult for him at the time, as my uncle would tell me. But I also say in a part of my life, there were some very, very influential people who were very much a benefactor for the Westfield Community Center. And that was the family of Charles and Florence M. Wallace. They did a tremendous effort in helping people in the town of Westfield. And I particularly knew her, and I was newspaper delivery for her, and she always took a special interest in myself, along with all of the daughters of hers.
Now, who was that? Tell me
That was the Charles Wallace. He was the inventor of the chlorinator, the invention to purify water. And I remember as a small kid, I met him and Mrs. Wallace, and they were from Tremont Avenue in Westfield. And they were always very, very nice, and she took a lot of pride in me. So I owe a lot to her, because she used to tell me, she says, you don't have to tell anyone. People can see you're black, and it just doesn't matter. And she was a teacher, and she was very, very, very nice to me.
Now, this is someone who is...
Very influential. She was the wife of Charles Wallace, the inventor. And Charles Wallace, the Wallace family, was very well known in the town of Westfield.
This is a black family?
The white family.
Oh, white family.
Yes.
Okay.
They were very, very well, affluent. And they had a special interest in me.
And how did you come to know her?
I was a newspaper. I delivered newspapers to her.
I see.
And for some reason, I don't know. I don't remember the first instance, but she was very helpful to me. The Eljabar Foundation was a part of their family.
I wonder if, when you say the Wallace, there was a Wallace in, I don't know, what's the full name? I want to just...
Charles Wallace. Charles and Florence Wallace. They were very instrumental in... they're one of our benefactors for the Westfield Community Center.
Is that family still around?
No, they're not alive now.
But there's an example that I always feel how one or two particular people that cross your path can change your whole future.
She was an influence, and she would always, as a kid, when I was a paper, and the ladies have teas, and they come to her house, and she would always want, show me off, and I always enjoyed that.
She was proud of you, that you were hardworking,
right,
delivering papers as a young boy,
right, whatever it was, and
probably very polite, because you're very, very kind and polite.
That's what she saw in me, and as I said, that helped me to be who I am to this day. And it was people like her that, that with all the racial this, that, and the other thing, how could I ever say, hey, anything against anybody because of their race? Because I know different. I have experienced different. And so it's a matter of people and their own small individual prejudices and likes and dislikes. They lack information, they lack knowledge. I says, but when I learned from my great uncle, knowledge is power. And just being black, because that's a color, your skin or definition. But if you have knowledge, you have power. And being black, that's black power.
And to just really judge each person for who they are.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't matter what color.
And like I said, Mrs. Wallace she always made me feel so important as a child.
Isn't that wonderful? That's wonderful.
And a lot of people, wouldn't believe that I had that sort of relationship with her. But when I was in the service, I remember I sent her a cuckoo clock from Japan. And she wrote back to me, she said, about it keeping perfect time. It was just something that I learned as a kid, that I had that pleasure and opportunity to know someone like her. And like I said, her husband, and she used to tell me, she said, we haven't always been well off, you know what I mean? She was telling me about the time when, early in their marriage in New York, they had a walk-up, cold water flat. But then he had this invention. He was an inventor. The Wallace and Tiernan Company over.
Well, that's what I said. Is it the Wallace and Tiernan?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, oh my God, that company is enormous. It became,
So I was very fortunate as a child to have been,
to have crossed their path, and she, you
and
know,
the community center is thankful also for her contribution to the center. She was always there for us.
So, so when you go back to the Minnewacan Club and the Toy Lending Library, so were they one of the first funders of the center?
Yes.
The Wallaces?
The Wallaces, yes.
Yes, and maybe perhaps because you knew her.
No, not
No,
because I
all
knew
right,
her.
well, I don't know, I'm
But
just- Mm-hmm.
because she was that type of person in the town of Westfield who saw the needs of those who were underprivileged.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Wallace, she was, she was an angel
Mm-hmm.
to anybody. You know what I mean? If you met her, that was lady. And then I used to remember when she used to complain about the pain in her face, and I used to feel so sorry for her, but, that woman made the difference. I always wanted to do something so she would be proud of me.
So you kept in contact?
Yes, right, until the time when she passed.
Oh, really?
And to this day, I've had some contact with the grandson.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great story. That would be a family even to continue to look at. But it really emulates Westfield, though, Wally,
Right.
too. How Westfield's always
Right.
had
and
a
I
real
can-
concern about the community and always trying to help to this day. I mean,
Right,
Westfield
and I can
is,
say that family, the Wallace family,
Mm-hmm.
they have contributed to the largest philanthropic fund in the state of New Jersey, the Fund of New Jersey.
that's great. So
You've heard of that, haven't you?
yes, yes.
So,
Okay, so you're not in Westfield at this time when this Minnewacan Club. So how did you come back into being involved with the center and becoming president, did you say?
Right, well, again, this Tom Campbell was here as an adult advisor at the Westfield Community Center under Ed Smith, who was the executive director at the time. And Tom asked me to take over the Citizens Club that
Now-
they had formed at the center to help the teenagers.
Okay.
And at that time,
That's what it was called, the Citizens Club
Citizens Club.
for the youth.
for the youth. And they were not adult, but teenagers, in that age group. And I said I would do that. And that was in 1961 or 62, something like that.
Are you working? Are you retired? What are you doing?
I was still with the Internal
Still
Revenue
working
Service.
and not living in Westfield, though?
Not living
But you
in
would
Westfield.
come to town and,
Do that. And that's been since 1960, 62, 63. And so I took on the responsibility of an adult advisor to the Citizens Club. And I was there, and I told them, there's articles in the newspaper about that. And at that time we were called Negro. And I especially said to the kids, stay in school, seek a skill. Knowledge is power. It's the same thing that my great uncle had told me
yes,
that I wanted to pass on to these young kids.
yes. And they need to hear that.
Right.
They
but
need to
in
have.
those times they had the fist. There was the black power fist that was a symbol of black nationalism or whatever they want to call it. So I told them, no, that's not the way to go. This is the way to go. Knowledge.
Education.
Stay in school, seek a skill. And this is what I told the kids and emphasized that very much. And so I enjoyed it. That, like I said, just about every month since then, I moved out of Westfield, but I'm in Westfield all the time. In East Orange, I did very little social involvement at all. All my involvement was just with my kids in schools in East Orange. But other than that, it's always been the Westfield Community Center.
So you still come back?
And I'm still coming back. I'm on the board now. I'm the treasurer of this organization. And I'm still serving.
But you were president how long? You were
I was
president?
president from 2003 to 2009.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
And I had planned to go to Florida when I retired from the state of New Jersey. That after my career with the Internal Revenue Service, I became a state auditor. And I worked with the state of New Jersey for an additional 15 years. So altogether, I served in government over 50 years. And I had that opportunity doing some research with my niece about my family trace and Westfield Negro History Club, and Ernie Powell, the historian, Ralph Jones, my classmate, all with history concerning the African American today and where we are and what's going on in the world today. of how my life in Westfield was very, very fruitful in my own experience. And I felt that being from Westfield, and I went around the world, been around the world, that I guess there was something special about me that people saw in me. And I guess, hey, I owe that to the Westfield school system. I owe it to people I met in the Westfield Community Center. And of course, the personalities that I'm familiar with, Mrs. Wallace, Mr. Tomlinson.
Mr. Tomlinson.
These are people, and also one of the ministers at that time, there was a Reverend Scott at the St. Luke's AME Zion Church. And as a kid, we used to get together. He would always take the kids and we'd go on what they call a big deal. It wasn't nothing but a car ride going around. But these people had an influence on me. So, and then my father, he told me, he says, Westfield is too small for you. He said, you're a self-made man. And I used to try to figure out what he meant by that.
Yeah, what did he mean by that?
And then he said to me, he said, you got your calling, but you didn't answer. And I tried to figure that out. So when I figured it out, well, as a child, I was always preached funerals for cats or dogs that got killed or something like that, because I used to get my mother's family Bibles out, which are in my possession, the only possession that I had. I got those family Bibles out, and I would put a sheet around me, and I'd be like a priest, and I'd have my orange crate or whatever it was, and I'd put the Bible up there, and I would preach the funerals. And so I guess maybe that's what he meant, but I'm not sure. But I used to get a beating getting my mother's Bibles, family Bibles out.
She didn't want you to do that, no?
No.
No.
Because, like I said, this is the only possession that I have that I was able to save from all my early days and belongings at West Broad Street address where I was born. And those Bibles are,
Very
proof.
special and very special, yeah.
Okay? 1823 and 1866, these Bibles. And like I said, I remember my grandfather having, he was with the lodge, the Elks, and with the Masons. My father was a Mason.
Oh, really?
And the Prince Hall affiliation, they were free and accepted Masons.
Because there's a Masons on Central Avenue, because that maybe would have been, this is when he was in Westfield, he was a Mason.
Yeah, but it was different. See, there's two orders. There was these African American, which is the Prince Hall affiliation.
Okay.
And then they had the Shriners and all of that. So, but they seem to have crossed paths now. It seemed things are getting better. It was no longer that division of the races as it was in earlier days. But like I said, when I grew up in Westfield, hey, my mother and Mr. Chellis lived behind us. My mother used to give her eggs, and Mr. Chellis would give us vegetables. And she had a ground. That woman stood only maybe 4 foot, dig up 100 feet of ground with a pitchfork.
Well, they
and
all
plant.
had their farms and their gardens.
Right, the big garden, and she used to do that. And then World War II, when they used to have the V letters, they cut out and they censored the stuff, the mail. And Mr. Chellis, now she lost 2 sons in World War II.
Oh my!
And my mother, her 3 sons came back, but Frankie and Pat, these are as kids. We didn't have that racial hatred or nothing like that. We were families, Italians and we all grew up together.
Right, right.
And then another friend of mine, I was in Korea, and I saw a guy, and I called out his family name. I said, "Hey, Pupin!" And he turned around, and we grew up together in Westfield.
Yeah.
And that's the Bulldog.
Oh, yeah, I know all these family names.
Oh, and when I called that, he knew right away.
Bean, yeah, I know that.
He knew right away that it had to be somebody from our street.
Westfield.
So we grew up together. We had our fights. We had our different. But hey,
Nothing
like what
to
goes
the degree.
on today.
No. Just touch a little bit about the women in your family. We're kind of winding down now, but would you say there certainly wasn't that much opportunity in a town like this, though? I'm sure you had women that did go on to school and further their education, but your family, I don't know, were they able to?
Yes, I can summarize in
the women's
something
roles?
that my mother told me, and I believe it was her. Anyhow, she like said, in those days, the families invested in the boys and not in the girls.
Unfortunately.
And I realized this, and then, like in my family, immediate family, there was 9 straight boys and 1 girl. So my father had said he wasn't going to stop until he had a girl. So it was a baseball team and an umpire. And so my sister was the youngest. She was the only one that was born in a hospital in Muhlenberg in 1938. And my younger brother, he wanted to be a doctor. That was Billy. And he always had that aspiration. Well, he did get to be a microbiologist.
Oh, excellent. Now, see,
And he was in the class of 52 behind me. And strangely enough, he said that when you want to go to medical school, how it affects your family members. In other words, we had 9 boys, and I was the first one to bring a high school diploma in. I had promised my mother that.
that was my question. How many of your siblings, well,
Only-
finished school? They didn't all finish high school.
No.
But you just mentioned 2 who went to college, you and your other brother.
Right. I was the first one to bring a diploma into the house. But I didn't stay for the graduation because I was in the service.
Okay.
My younger brother brought the first high school diploma, went through the graduation, and also brought the first college degree.
Now,
into the
why
family.
would that have been? The other ones
Because-
didn't have the same interest, do you think?
I
or
think my brother told me, he says he was able to use me as an idol to my younger
as
brother.
a role model?
So he stuck with me. And I found that out. And he told me later on in life when he went to go to medical school, apply for this, that these questions would be on these things about how many in your family did this or did that. And he felt up until the time he died that because his family didn't go into medicine or didn't do this, that his chances of getting into were very slim. And it is true.
But he did.
He
did.
wanted to be a microbiologist, so he didn't get to be a doctor like he wanted to. But he used to, talk about. As a kid, he used to have a little doctor's bag for Christmas. That's all he got for his doctor's kit.
But he did. Biologist was
But
quite
he
an
became a
accomplishment.
microbiologist, yes.
And your other siblings just went on and just became
Right. Even my sister, she left school. She didn't go on. And my oldest brother, with a 9th grade education, was a warrant officer in the United States Army. He was in a tank destroyer. He was out of Fort Hood, Texas. My second oldest brother, he was going to be a mechanical dentist. He went up to the 11th grade and quit. The third oldest went to junior high school, and then he quit. And all of them, they quit to go to work.
Well, 9 siblings, is it 9?
9.
That's quite a lot. And to even entertain the idea of going to further education,
Right.
it was one thing to finish high school would have been an accomplishment.
Right.
To go on beyond with that many children.
Right.
But you were the younger one. So more time had passed when it was maybe more accepted, and depending on the support you got, like you said, from the individuals.
Right.
Mr. Tomlinson, your siblings perhaps didn't have that benefit.
No.
And they were earlier. So
Right.
as it's almost another decade, 9 siblings more, right?
Yeah.
You would have had more influence to encourage you to go,
Right.
even though I'm sure your family would have liked you to go.
But the thing that I had to do for my mother is my mother used to say, she says, all these boys and none of them finished high school. So I remember as a kid, I said, Mom, I'm going to be the first one to bring a high school diploma. I promised my mother. So that
was your
the
incentive.
inborn
That was your
incentive
incentive.
was to be different.
And to please
that-
her. And as someone told you, knowledge is
Right.
power. Education is the
Exactly.
key.
And then I would read the Bible, and I would always see something. If I could say something that, in spite of my family, whatever they didn't do or did do, there was always something that hung above me to be different.
Well, and I
And-
think to succeed, Wally, I think you wanted to succeed.
Well, I don't know what it was.
I think you wanted to succeed.
And-
And you're still, you're still to this day coming to the center, helping and making a difference. And that's
Wow.
you should be congratulated for that.
Well, it's just one of those things.
I'm proud to meet you and spend this time with you.
Well, like I say, I paid my dues, and like I said, those people that influenced me most, I guess it starts right out in the home, was my mother, My older brother with football. Other brother, the oldest brother, is getting education. He only had a ninth grade education, but he knew math, he knew televisions and all of that. So everybody in my family had an occupation, a trade that they did on their own. We were taxi drivers, owned taxi, had taxi businesses.
Yeah, I mean, you're an incredible example of what African American.
Entrepreneurship.
Yes, and certainly you fill the role of successful African Americans, of which there are many, and I think young people need to know that.
Right.
They have the opportunity to do the same as anyone else.
I guess, like I say, like you said before, individual. When you're an individual, that sort of vibration you get from another individual, it's either going to be positive or negative.
Right.
And of course, if these things opposite, they work opposite each other. So when you find somebody that's good, you sort of pick that up. It becomes contagious.
Well, and I hope there might be mentoring programs at the center. I think mentoring is so important. I mentored a little girl at McKinley. I went to McKinley School as well. My mother went to my grandfather helped build McKinley School. And I mentor a young girl right now whose family's, life is not quite as it should be. So it's having that one person in your life, and we all need to continue to do that. So anything you'd like to close with in particular?
Well, I like to say that I just wish that people would be more concerned about those who are not so fortunate as they are. I have a lot to be blessed and thankful for, and it's just an idea is that you cannot quit. You must keep on trying to do the best you can for yourself and help someone else. And if you try to help someone else, you're always going to help yourself.
Right.
And I feel also that an organization has to have all this diversity of people and opinions, and the community center has brought that to me. And so it's not what you don't agree to. Let's do what we can agree to. Let's get something done that we can do to help others who are less fortunate.
Exactly.
And the community center, the fellowship of the world begins in one's own neighborhood.
Right.
It begins within oneself. That if you can show to another person, that other individual, one individual, who you are and who you really want to be, it becomes contagious.
And let the other person know that they matter.
Exactly.
They matter.
And if you're trying to help someone to help themselves, I think that's the greatest thing that anyone can do. And above all, your word should be your bond.
Right.
And if you can tell somebody a lie, I said that's the worst thing in the world. And I say a liar is worse than a thief.
Right. Absolutely.
A thief will steal, but a liar you never know when he's telling the truth.
Right.
And I remember my mother always saying that. And I try to be something of myself that I can say influence another person. Hey, you not only be nice, but you got to be sort of honest.
Right.
None of us are perfect, but we must strive for perfection.
Right.
And if we slip or we slide or something like that, we can recover from that.
Right.
And we got to keep on keeping on.
Right.
And I say to myself, if there was something that I want people to remember about me, is that I try to help somebody to help themselves.
And tonight, I'll just say you're going to be helping the Historical Society. They've asked you to be on the Hall of Fame. The last few years, we developed a Westville Hall of Fame. And Wally is going to meet tonight be on the committee to select inductees to the Westville Hall of Fame.
Right.
And I'd like to just close also with the points you made. Growing up in Westfield, you'll hear it over and over how fortunate we are to be in a town like Westfield and have the environment and the caring community that it is.
Yes.
It's like every community has its issues, has its a little bit of.
But Westfield is different.
But it is a wonderful community to grow up in.
And I can say this, that like recently, because I said we held our 60th class reunion. And that was at the Echo Lake Country Club. And when you mentioned Shady Rest Country Club back early, the first African-American golf course in the United States of America.
Right, very famous Shady Rest.
Right, and I am currently working to keep that site as a historical, cultural site. And I'm trying to work on several projects, trying to get several organizations to come together to make that a community project.
Are you working with Ethel Washington?
Yes.
Yes, I used to work with Ethel at Cultural and Heritage.
Yes.
I was the arts coordinator, and Ethel is the history coordinator.
Right.
She works very hard in trying to preserve
Right. In
African
fact, I
history.
just want to do something. I think the Ethel's collection, the Westfield Community Center should be a point of interest too. So there's a lot of things that I want to suggest to Ethel, but the Shady Rest thing is what's on my mind now.
Right.
And because like the people from Westfield were very instrumental in that.
Well, I think Westfield Club
Dr.
was
Humphrey.
part of there.
Yeah.
And then it branched off to Echo Lake.
Right.
I understand.
Exactly. That's when you mentioned Echo Lake.
Right.
That was when they decided that the so-called Negroes would have their own course or whatever it is.
Right.
So I looked forward to the people in the community now today and says, hey, that's heritage. Let's do that. Let's get together and preserve that because it's nationwide. It's the first African, and with the Tiger Woods of today, or all his ups and downs, whatever. But the thing was, this John Shippen, who was historic,
Right.
I mean, there's history to that I think it should be preserved.
Well, history is absolutely integral to our whole being, and as I say, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been.
Exactly. So I would think that my efforts with the community center, as well as with the neighboring communities of Scotch Plains, we call it Jersey Land, that there's something that we can do for the future of the African American citizen in Union County.
And show the young people that they have a future, and they
Right.
just have to stay with
And
it.
there's something to their heritage
Yes.
that they have. And it's up to us today. We may not see it, but we must do something to preserve it.
Well, and let them also know what they've accomplished. The
That's
man
true,
that
too.
developed the gas mask, I learned, was African American.
Right.
The accomplishments of the black people have been
Right.
up there with what we've accomplished,
You see
and that
what-
should not be diminished.
Right.
That has to be accentuated.
You see, when you're not in power, you cannot control.
Yes, but that's why it was important for me to do this, and we have a grant now to research African Americans in Westfield.
And
Well,
I
I could go on. I hate to close the interview.
Right, but I just want to show you a few things that you can just put in the notes. Here's an award. I've gotten this. This was when I told you earlier. I was a discharged Marine Corps veteran.
So Wally is showing me some of his samples of his accomplishments, and he has a wonderful scrapbook here, which we're going to continue to look at, but I want to thank him again for all of his time and what he continues to do, and Westfield can be proud of your family having been here. There is nobody here at the moment.
No, I'm the last survivor.
But not living here, so,
I'm the last of my family.
okay,
No, everybody's gone. There I am receiving my medal that was just done there.
Right.
And then, of course, that's me.
oh my,
And then
So handsome.
most important
oh my,
is
handsome.
this here, letter here. This was, I had this case, I am the investigator on this case, that it was a $10 million fraud scheme that I was able to.
Intervene on. Okay,
I was
Wally.
given that award, the Secret Service, and of course, I have this sign
Wow.
from Hubert Humphrey.
Yeah.
And here I am here. We're called Burke's Raiders, Campaign 68.
Amazing. The scrapbook is wonderful. Maybe some of it you can share with the Historical Society
will.
one day.
Let me
Okay,
see.
thank you very much.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure.
Here, when they had this is me right here.
I need your glasses. Okay, we're going to sign off, and I'm going to look at the album.
Okay.
Thank you.